What's going on, everybody? Welcome to a new start of the week. Bitcoin is having a decent day today. I'll show you on the chart what I'm looking for this move upwards to continue. We have TeraWulf reporting earnings today. We're going to look at their chart real quick. We also have another miner that was going to report earnings, but they delayed it, and that's causing a bit of a sell-off, a little bit of fear. Bitfarms delayed their earnings. We're going to talk about Bitfarms a little bit as well. And similar to Bitcoin, CleanSpark also has a chart set up where we're looking at a descending resistance. We're also looking at a break over the 50 MA. I'll show you guys that on the chart as well. And we also have CPI coming up here and PPI. It might shape out to be a pretty volatile week. If you guys get something useful out of this, make sure you like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and let's get started. First off, I want to briefly cover this article. I'll leave it down below for you guys, but they basically mentioned CPI coming out, PPI coming out as well. Also, Jerome Powell speaking. This is going to be at the annual general meeting at the Foreign Bankers Association in Amsterdam. And while this isn't necessarily a FOMC meeting, the markets could be very sensitive to Powell's tone. Now, looking at the potential for rate cuts, as we get on into the later 2024, the market does see potential for rate cuts. And getting into September, the market sees one potential rate cut as a nearly 50% chance. And as we get into 2025, the potential for rate cuts becomes even more likely. And I know you don't want to hear this. You hear this from Jerome Powell every single meeting, but it does depend on upcoming data. Can we get CPI, PPI, all of these different inflation data metrics? Can we get them under the 3s into the low 2s to the Fed's target? CPI will be very important to watch. If we see a rise in CPI, this will mark the 3rd straight monthly rise. This is not the trend we want to see. Before CPI, we do have PPI coming up, and this is going to be on the 14th. Previous read was a 2.1%. It's forecasted to be a 2.2, so we're expected to see a little rise here in PPI. If it comes out and it's under last month, that would be a great sign. And if it's under last month, that means it's probably 2% then. Sadly, Jerome Powell doesn't care as much about PPI, and we have seen PPI nearly become deflationary actually. We nearly saw it come down under 0. There was a month where we saw it at 0.2. in 2023 during the summer. However, from that point forwards, we started seeing PPI start rising. It basically kind of has been floundering around 1.5% to 2% as of late. One thing we definitely don't want to see is it tick up past 2.2%. That would be our highest reading since about a year ago. And looking at CPI over almost a year now, we have been range bound as well, from the low 3s all the way to about 3.7%. We just cannot crack 3%. Now, our previous read was a 3.5%. It has been coming up. As I showed you guys, we've been seeing consecutive rises on CPI. This upcoming one is expected to be a slight decrease. It'll be very important to actually see that. If not, the market will panic. If not, the chance for rate cuts gets pushed even farther out. Now, I wanted to go back to this article because it doesn't only talk about CPI, PPI coming up, and this bankers meeting. It also talks about in 2024, long-term holders halt distribution. And in an analysis on Crypto Quant, Martoon explains that, interestingly, a trend line can be drawn between the data points from 2018, 2021, and 2024. There's a cyclical trend occurring, as previously described, where long-term holders buy in bear markets and sell in bull markets. However, a broader and more enduring trend is also at play. Despite this cyclical trend, an increasing share of Bitcoin is steadily being held by long-term holders. And this is a chart of the short-term holders and long-term holders supply. Looks like short-term holders was taken out of this. But you can see that the long-term holders are stopping their distribution. We're starting to see this curl. We want to see this come back upwards, but it's kind of repeating what we've been seeing, like we saw in 2018, 2021, and here in 2024. The only thing is, this seems to have no rhyme or reason based on the halving cycle. For instance, 2018 was 2 years after the halving, 2021 was 1 year after the halving, and here we are at the year of the halving. So it's kind of strange that this is correlating when it is in no way correlated to the timeline of the halving cycles. But considering that we saw all-time high earlier this time around, perhaps the market is treating this similar to a post-halving year. Now, one last thing I wanted to mention in this article is Dan Crypto Trades is pointing out this so-called bull market support band. You'll see that we did get a bounce off of it. We did wick down to it, and you've seen this in the past where we wick down to it and it holds it as support. Although we did break it back here in September, Bitcoin does tend to hold up on this support band. Hopefully this turns out to be another instance of that. Now, I did want to show you guys Bitcoin, and I think things are looking pretty good. One thing that we were seeing earlier here was a divergence on the 4 hour. We were seeing higher lows on the RSI here, We're seeing lower lows on the chart here. Seems like the market did react to this divergence. Also, last night we were kind of trading in this upward channel. The market seemed to want to play out this inverse head and shoulders, and we followed this channel upwards. We broke out of it and we saw a huge positive reaction. Now that was on the 4 hour there, but on the daily, I am still seeing this breakout of this downtrend. We are not there yet. I want to see a candle close above it. We have wicked out of it a few times, but the price fell back in the pattern before the candle could close out of it, or we could get a new candle to print. We're at a pretty important point for Bitcoin. Either we are going to break out of this descending resistance and come to test our 50 MA, which we have previously tested a few times and failed, or we're going to find this resistance as a resistance and we're going to pull back, retest our shoulder here, retest this 60,500 area. I also want to see the RSI on the daily break 50. We have been finding it as a resistance. And looking at the volume profile, we're at an important point as well. If we can pass this zone here, it's a matter of breaking this zone. But if we can pass this, we can probably fly up towards our 67,000 area. I do think a successful break of the 50 MA will bring us to 67,000. CleanSpark, you can see, has a similar structure to Bitcoin as well. You'll see that we're facing this descending resistance. We have had candles wick out of it, but we haven't had a candle close out of it. CleanSpark is also finding resistance on its 50 MA. Similar to Bitcoin, CleanSpark has a bit of a wall to break here. Once we can break above 18, I do think CleanSpark doesn't have much resistance to bring it to 20, but it's a matter of getting to that 18 first. We do have TeraWulf reporting earnings today as of this upload, and they are expecting a profitable quarter. They're expecting a $45 million revenue quarter as well. Nice growth in revenue there, nearly a double in revenue potentially. Last earnings, they did see a unprofitable quarter compared to some that did see a profitable quarter. And I do think chart is setting up into earnings. You'll just see this tightening pattern. We're seeing higher lows. We're seeing lower highs though. The price is tightening. This is springing back to launch either to the upside or to the downside, all up to earnings though. If earnings comes out good, I do think TeraWulf can run, barring a drop from Bitcoin. And if TeraWulf gives a bad earnings, it's probably going to drop, barring a positive run on Bitcoin. But yeah, the main thing I'm watching here for TeraWulf is a break of this pattern. I do think a break of either direction will bring a substantial move. It's all a matter of getting out of this range here. Once we break out of it, we will see a pretty substantial move in my opinion. And as I said earlier, Bitfarms did reschedule their earnings. It was supposed to come out today. They rescheduled it to the 15th. And they didn't really give a reason. They might have to just revise something. There might have been some last touches that they needed to complete. Who knows, you can only speculate. But this is sadly causing a drop for Bitfarms compared to others that are having a pretty decent day for the most part. And there's definitely a different chart setup than something like a CleanSpark or a TeraWulf. We have Bitfarms creating new recent lows. And although it's performed quite well from the bear market, you know, we're still up about 300%. And by we, I mean you guys, I don't hold this. It is down roughly 60% from its peak. There's been a bit of fear circulating around this recently. I heard that the CEO exited. We of course broke our structure. We saw a pattern break. We saw us break this pattern and then we went to test it and it found it as resistance and we continued falling. Now we're facing a declining 50 and 200 MA. And honestly, they're getting pretty close to a potential death cross. If we keep seeing some negative momentum, if we don't start recovering here, I do think that death cross is going to happen. And that might bring some more short-term fear. But you never know, maybe earnings surprises and maybe things go well. We're able to hold this up, break over the 50 and the 200 MA and keep our golden cross, keep our overall bullish momentum. Upcoming earnings, they are expecting a loss compared to pretty much every other miner that reported a profit. And they are expecting a $50 million quarter. What is this about? Why are we seeing such a dip in revenue cycle to cycle? So to me, that's one red flag. You know, a lot of Bitcoin miners are hitting new highs in terms of revenue. They're seeing consistent revenue growth. They're seeing cycle over cycle revenue growth. They're seeing all-time highs in terms of revenue. Bitfarms is still not breaking the revenue it saw in the last cycle. If they don't post a profitable quarter here, they're not going to post a profitable quarter until later in the bull run. Keep in mind, this is the last earnings before the halving rewards being cut takes effect. In the earnings after this, they're going to have the halving rewards being cut to deal with, just like all the other miners. But you know, that's a negative to see that they're potentially going to post a loss. They posted a loss last quarter. A lot of other Bitcoin miners have posted profits in both of these quarters. One thing I don't like is their Bitcoin production has actually came down year over year. I don't think I know of a single other miner that has experienced that. Just because Bitfarms is down 60%, does that mean all hope is lost? No. We saw pullbacks like this in the last cycle. We saw a 60% drop right here. We've seen worse on huge, you know, quick wicks here. But, you know, we have seen these types of drops in the same time in the cycle. In the end, I think it's very important to be heavily diversified into these Bitcoin miners, not just hold one. Have a couple high conviction top picks, because you never know. One might out of nowhere report some dilution. One out of nowhere might have a short attack. You never know what could happen. You know, one of your top miners could get a lawsuit thrown at it. One of your top miners could have some emergency happen at one of their mining sites. Could have a fire. An extremely hot summer could curtail some of these miners' production. You never know what the future holds, and I do think it's very important to have at least a few top Bitcoin miners in your portfolio. Don't just go all in one, because they do tend to run at different times. For instance, one could be announcing a share offering, it starts tanking. You could buy into that one while another one's running and you're taking profits on it. I do think having multiple miners gives you a little bit more flexibility, and having multiple miners instead of being all in one obviously also mitigates risk. Do I think stocks like Bitfarms, Sphere 3D, which I own, other miners that haven't been doing as well recently, do I think they will recover and test all-time highs, or recent highs at least? I do think on Bitcoin's next break to new all-time highs, we will see some added optimism to these miners. Sentiment right here, in my opinion, is near its worst, and I really don't think we got to peak euphoria yet. I do think these miners will go higher in price, and while news recently around Bitfarms hasn't been the greatest, I do think they'll see a recovery throughout the rest of this year. I do think looking at the end of this year, we'll see a higher price than we are now. And the Bitcoin space will see a pump of FOMO. It's just a matter of seeing Bitcoin get back to those all-time highs, seeing Bitcoin break its downtrend, getting a sigh of relief in the market, and getting a little more hype again, getting a little more euphoria and FOMO entering the Bitcoin miners. Ever since the halving, ever since a couple months before the halving even, they have been kind of tanking. They have been seeing a pullback. The market priced in them cutting the rewards. What comes throughout the rest of this bull run is, well, Bitcoin's bull run. I showed you guys in previous videos why I don't think the peak is in for Bitcoin and why I do think we're going higher. And when Bitcoin goes higher, this will bring higher prices to all of these Bitcoin miners. But let me know how you guys are feeling about Bitfarms lately. What are you expecting out of TeraWulf today? How are you feeling about Bitcoin and CleanSpark? What miners have you been taking advantage of lately? And also, what altcoins are you buying? I do think now is a good time to start getting into altcoins. As we get later into this Bitcoin cycle, typically the alts do see a really good run, and many have performed quite well so far. But let me know what you guys are doing in the market. How are you preparing for CPI, PPI, the upcoming Fed banking meeting thing? Are you selling puts on these miners? Are you selling covered calls at this time? And what's your strategy moving forwards? Also, we should have Iris Energy reporting in a few days, as well as BTBT. So stick around, I will be covering those as well. Thanks as always for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.